It's just about time for you to start thinking about pruning those early flowering shrubs, and of course lilacs are one of those. You can see the difference between the old-fashioned types or the hybrids of the old-fashioned and the ones that bloom later. Not time to prune these yet. It is time to prune these. People ask us about deadheading and taking off the seed heads. That's not essential, but if you look at what's happened here, the old flowers were down lower because they were set on previous year's buds, and this is the new wood. This is where those new flower buds will initiate. So this is the time to think about reducing the height of these lilacs, taking out some of these great big old canes, and that's really essential in lilacs because that is what the borers love, is those great big ones, and then bringing these down to a point where next year you're going to have flowering. If you take everything down to the ground, or we say 18 inches, not really to the ground, you will not get flowering next year. But again, the pruning time is now within the next 2-3 weeks, maybe a month before those new flower buds initiate. Forsythia is another example of one of our early blooming shrubs, and they were perfect and beautiful this year. You can actually see where the spent flowers were, and you can also see all that new growth. So it is absolutely time to do a lot of pruning on the Forsythia. We don't recommend turning anything into a round ball, although you can do that with this plant. But to be able to bring it back into some form, take off some of the long leggy growth, perhaps it's come to the point where you do have to take out some of the old canes, but just make this shrub into something that really will be pleasing for next year. And if you do that pruning now, you will not be removing next year's flower buds. Our beautiful early flowering Nanking cherry also puts on edible fruit. So of course, as you're pruning, you probably do not want to prune off the fruit, but you do want to encourage new growth for next year. This shrub has seen its better days. We have some canes that need to come out because they are big and old and clearly not in the greatest of health. But again, if you look at this particular plant, you can see where the cherries have been set, and you can either prune below that point or you can sacrifice some of that fruit for next year. Then we move off into spirea. We have many different kinds of spirea. This is the little one called dwarf garland spirea, which puts on its flowers on previous year's wood. And you can actually see where the bloom was, absolutely spectacular, and you can see all this new growth. So again, to be able to either reduce the height of a little bit of this long leggy growth, make sure that your shrub stays in proportion, this is the time of year you can do that. You really do need to know whether your shrubs bloom on current year's wood or previous year's wood so you don't sacrifice the flowers and the fruit. You're probably not going to kill the shrubs, but you don't want to lose that beauty. The other thing to pay attention to is shrubs that have kind of outgrown their space. Maybe they've gobbled up their neighbors and you want to take them back a little bit. And you also need to keep in mind that their growth might not be finished for the season. So if you take off 6 inches, but they're growing 3 feet, they're still going to take up too much space.